If you've ever noticed that Gen Z can seem both extremely expressive and strangely guarded at the same time, there's usually a reason for that. They'll post, then delete, share a lot, but still keep the real parts hidden. They'll joke about everything, but overthink one text for an hour. They can look confident online and still feel exposed by something as small as a photo, a comment, or even the way someone leaves them on read. That doesn't come from nowhere. Gen Z is the first generation that didn't just grow up with the internet, they grew up with an audience. And when you're forming your identity while being watched, compared, reacted to, and remembered in real time, it changes more than your habits. It changes how safe it feels to be seen. For a lot of Gen Z, being online was never just entertainment. It was social life, identity, reputation, friendship, rejection, belonging, and memory all happening in the same place. That means ordinary behaviors start carrying a lot more emotional weight. Something as simple as sending a message doesn't always feel simple. You're not just choosing words, you're managing tone. You're thinking about how it could be interpreted, whether it sounds too cold, too eager, too dry, too much. Even punctuation starts to mean something. A period can sound annoyed. A short reply can feel personal. A delayed response can trigger a whole private story. From the outside, that can look like sensitivity or overthinking, but the hidden meaning is usually this. When communication happens in spaces where everything can be replayed, screenshotted, and judged, people become careful, not weak, careful. And that carefulness becomes part of identity. A lot of Gen Z learned very early that being visible means being open to reaction, not just from close friends, but from classmates, strangers, group chats, algorithms, and silent viewers who never say anything but still see everything. So even normal self-expression can start to feel like exposure. That's why you see so much controlled visibility, private accounts, close friends' stories, posting late and deleting early, choosing angles carefully, sharing thoughts through memes instead of direct statements, saying something real then softening it with humor, wanting to be known but only in very specific doses. It can look contradictory, but it isn't. It's what happens when someone wants connection and protection at the same time. And that tension shows up everywhere. Gen Z is often described as highly self-aware, but sometimes what looks like self-awareness is actually self-monitoring. There's a difference. Self-awareness is knowing how you feel. Self-monitoring is constantly watching yourself from the outside. That's a very different experience. It means you're not just living the moment. Part of you is observing the moment while you're in it. How do I sound? How do I look? Was that embarrassing? Did that land wrong? Do I seem awkward? Did I post too much, not enough? Did they interpret that the way I meant it? When that becomes normal, identity starts forming under observation. And here's where it gets interesting. A lot of people assume these patterns are about insecurity or attention, but the real reason often isn't attention, it's control. When you grow up in public, control starts to feel emotionally important. If other people can define you quickly, misread you instantly, or reduce you to one clip, one screenshot, one bad angle, one awkward phase, then curating yourself becomes a form of safety. Managing perception isn't always vanity. Sometimes it's self-protection. That's why Gen Z can seem so intentional about image while also being deeply suspicious of performance. They know what performance looks like because they've lived inside it. They've seen how easy it is to turn a person into content, a personality into a label, a mistake into an identity. So now there's this strange pressure to be authentic but not too vulnerable, honest but not cringe, visible but not fully reachable, different but still legible, confident but not embarrassing. That's a hard emotional balance to live inside. And it helps explain something else about Gen Z that often gets misunderstood, the humor. A lot of Gen Z uses irony, absurdity, and detachment, almost like emotional padding. The joke arrives first. The real feeling is hidden underneath. Even pain gets translated into humor, into references, into language that keeps things moving before they get too raw. That's not because the feeling isn't real. It's because direct vulnerability can feel too exposed when you've spent years in spaces where openness can be rewarded one second and mocked the next. Humor gives distance, and distance gives control. The same thing shows up in relationships. A lot of Gen Z cares deeply for connection, but connection doesn't always feel simple. There can be a lot of fear around saying too much, needing too much, looking too eager, being misunderstood, or giving someone enough material to reject you more clearly. So instead of direct conflict, you sometimes get withdrawal, slow fading, half-said feelings, emotional closeness mixed with strategic distance. People can become very good at signaling and very uncomfortable with full exposure. Again, that's not randomness, it's a pattern.
If you learned that people can observe you without really understanding you, then being fully known can start to feel risky. Being perceived is not the same as being safe, and that may be one of the deepest psychological tensions in Gen Z. They are one of the most visible generations in history, and also one of the most emotionally watched. Their awkward phases were documented, their opinions were posted early, their changing identities were often public before they were fully formed. Even their memories came with comments, reactions, and metrics attached. Previous generations had private versions of themselves that could disappear with time. Gen Z often had digital versions of themselves that stayed. That changes the way a person relates to growth. It can create pressure to get it right early, to be coherent too soon, to explain yourself before you've even finished becoming yourself. And when identity is still forming, that kind of pressure can make self-expression feel heavy. Even comparison works differently in that environment. Every generation compares, but Gen Z compares in a space where comparison is built into the structure. Numbers are attached to people. Visibility is ranked. Popularity is measurable. Beauty, humor, social status, even relatability can all start to feel quantifiable. That does something subtle to the mind. It teaches people to experience themselves partly as images, as impressions, as something that can be evaluated from the outside. And once that habit forms, it can follow you even when the phone is down. So sometimes the exhaustion Gen Z feels isn't just social exhaustion, it's perceptual exhaustion, the fatigue of being too aware of how you might be coming across. And the hard part is that this can exist alongside real emotional intelligence. Gen Z often has strong language for mental health, boundaries, patterns, trauma, and identity. They can name a lot of what they feel, but naming something doesn't always make it lighter. Sometimes it just makes the inner world more visible. And when you already feel watched, even your self-awareness can start feeling performative. You know your wounds, you know your defense mechanisms, you can explain your reactions, but explanation and freedom are not the same thing. So what starts to form is a generation that can be deeply reflective, highly perceptive, emotionally literate, and still incredibly guarded. Not because they don't feel deeply, but because they do. That's why Gen Z can seem hard to read if you only look at the surface. The detachment, the humor, the curation, the disappearing acts, the carefulness, the hesitation, the private accounts, the overthinking, the desire to be understood without being fully exposed, all of it points to the same deeper pattern. They were raised in an environment where being seen was constant, but feeling safe in that visibility was never guaranteed. And once you understand that, a lot of their behavior starts to make sense. It's not just about social media. It's about what happens to identity when there's almost no gap between experience and reaction, when your life can be witnessed before you've had time to process it yourself. when your image reaches people faster than your inner world does. That kind of environment doesn't just shape habits, it shapes the nervous system. It shapes trust. It shapes how people reveal themselves, hide themselves, soften themselves, and edit themselves. So the psychology of Gen Z may not be about being attention-seeking, overly sensitive, or image-obsessed in the shallow way people often assume. It may be something quieter than that. A generation learning how to exist while feeling visible all the time. A generation trying to be real in a space that constantly turns people into performances. A generation that learned early that being noticed and being known are not the same thing. And once you see that, you can't really unsee it. It was never random. It was a pattern. If this explains something for you, there's more to uncover. Understanding yourself is often just learning to recognize the environment that shaped you.